Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Junior English. We are in our MyPerspectives volume on page 496, 497. We're working with the great Carl Sandburg and his classic Wilderness. We'll start right away by pointing out the form of this poem. It looks very much more like a piece of prose than it does poetry. Notice as well the use of the ellipsis. Sandburg, of course, going to borrow probably pretty heavily from that first publishing edition of 1855, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, where Whitman used a lot of the ellipses. We're going to see 28 of these ellipses here. Finally, in our big five, that is to say, epistemology, what one can know, ontology, who one is, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective group mind, and then finally the question of theodicy. Why must there be bad things that happen in the world? Sandburg's going to tackle all five of our big five. He's going to do it pretty remarkably, but he's going to really focus on the ontological question, who are you? Or more particularly, who am I? And he'll begin by pointing out that, well, there's a lot of different kinds of animals. Now, we're going to have 6 animals referenced here, starting with the wolf. We're going to go to a fox, then to a hog, and then to a fish, and a baboon, and finally an eagle and a mockingbird. And then we'll finish with his commenting specifically about the zoo that he carries within himself. Some of you will love this poem, especially because of his celebration of wilderness. There's a wolf in me, so he'll start there. Notice again the ellipsis. There's a wolf in me, fangs pointed for tearing gashes, a red tongue for raw meat, and the hot lapping of blood. I keep this wolf because the wilderness gave it to me, and the wilderness will not let it go. So let's pause for a moment, right off there to the side. He says, I got a wolf in me. Notice the violent imagery that will be played out with the wolf, obviously because we live so close to the Yellowstone area out here in Wyoming. We know all about this debate about wolves, right? Notice he says, I can't let this one go because the wilderness gave me this wolf and the wilderness won't let it go. In other words, there's some element of the wolf in me. Number 2, there's a fox in me. A silver gray fox. I sniff and guess. I pick things out of the wind and air. I nose in the dark night and take sleepers and eat them and hide the feathers. I circle and loop and double cross. Now you can jump to 3a and you'll remember in our study of Machiavelli's Prince that he talks about the interesting fox-like tendencies of good politicians. Notice the difference between a wolf and a fox. A wolf has superior force, and therefore violence, direct violence, is easy for the wolf. For the fox, not so much. There has to be a certain kind of snooping about, right? Notice I sniff and guess. I pick things out of the wind and the air. I nose in the dark night, take sleepers and eat them. That is to say, obviously, the birds and hide the feathers. I circle and loop and double cross. In other words, there's an element, he says, of the fox in me that's not so direct, that's not so, can we say it, Achillean, but rather, to use the Odyssey referencing, but rather more Odyssean, right? In other words, I'm a pretty good double crosser. I'm good at lying, and that's part of the wilderness. Then, from there, he goes to the hog. There's a hog in me. A snout and a belly, a machinery for eating and grunting, a machinery for sleeping satisfied in the sun. Can you hear all those S sounds? Sleeping satisfied in the sun. I got these 2 from the wilderness, and the wilderness will not let it go. So notice, the hog, different from the wolf, different from the fox. The hog is more interested in what? Well, eating and grunting. Notice he calls it a machinery for sleeping satisfied in the sun. In other words, there's an element, he says, in me that's active, but there's also an element, like the hog, that likes to just lay around and do next to nothing. From the wolf and the fox and the hog now, we go to the fish. There's a fish in me. I know I came from salt blue water gates. I scurried with shoals of herring. I blew water spouts with porpoises before land was, before the water went down, before Noah, before the first chapter of Genesis. This is, of course, going to be referencing biblical texts, as your footnote will tell you. In other words, I go all the way back. Now, obviously, he can be speaking evolutionarily here, and he can also, of course, be talking about what's different between a wolf, a fox, a hog, and then a fish. Much different, right? Going way back in time. By the way, notice the hyphenated 2 phrases of salt blue water gates. Now, from that, the fish, we come to the baboon, all right? And now notice we're getting closer to primate if you're wanting to speak in evolutionary language. There's a baboon in me, clamoring clawed, dog-faced. Again, you'll notice those two phrases with the hyphen. Yopping galoot's hunger, galoot, uncivilized person. Yopping here is the most obvious reference to Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, passage 52, My Barbaric Yop. Yopping a galoot's hunger, hairy under the armpits. Here are the hawk-eyed, hankering men. Here are the blonde and blue-eyed women. Here they hide curled asleep, waiting, ready to snarl and kill. Takes us back, obviously, to the wolf. Ready to sing and give milk, waiting. I keep the baboon because the wilderness says so. Now, of course, wilderness is built from the word wild. In other words, there is a certain kind of element of the wild in me that he says I'm going to embrace. Now, from all of that, which is more earthbound, we then go, of course, to the birds. 2, there's an eagle in me and a mockingbird. Well, obviously, think of Harper Lee's classic To Kill a Mockingbird. And the eagle flies among the Rocky Mountains of my dreams and fights among the Sierra crags of what I want. And the mockingbird warbles in the early forenoon before the dew is gone, warbles in the underbrush of my Chattanoogas of hope, gushes over the blue Ozark foothills of my wishes. And I got the eagle and the mockingbird from the wilderness. Notice his use of the eagle and the mockingbird, two different kinds, obviously, of bird. Notice that he also geographically, I think this is brilliant what he does here, to speak as an American. Notice he'll go to the west into the Rockies, and then he'll come back to the east with the Chattanoogas and, of course, the Ozarks of Arkansas and elsewhere. And then the last one brings it all together. Oh, he begins with that word, oh, and of course that takes us back to our study of Whitman for sure. Oh, I got a zoo, I got a menagerie, that is to say a collection. Inside my ribs, under my bony head, under my red valve heart. And I got something else. Notice now the colon. It is a man-child. Again, notice the hyphenation. It is a man-child heart, a woman-child heart. It's a father and mother and lover. It came from God knows where. It's going to God knows where. For I am the keeper of the zoo. I say yes and no. I sing and kill and work. I am a pal of the world. I came from the wilderness. Now many students will love I am a pal of the world as the great line of this poem. That is to say, I am willing to accept all of the different elements that make me, me. And of course, in the Unit 4 topic of grit and grandeur, notice there is both elements in the human condition. There is obviously the thing about grit and the struggle and the fight, but there's also this amazing, majestic element as well of the human, which lends itself here to celebrating at the very end. Notice that there's something else, he says, a man-child heart, a woman-child heart, a mother and father and lover, right? In other words, it's what makes us human. Now, it seems to me that Sandburg is raising a very interesting question. Are we in fact born human, or are we rather born mammalian? That is to say, we're mammals. And to that degree, we're like wolves, we're like foxes, we're like hogs, and so on it goes. Until we make a decision to be human. And we call that being humane. And what is that? Well, that's our education. In other words, we have to choose to be human. We have to choose to be humane. And the way that we do that, of course, is by reading poems such as this. Well, let's go ahead and go to it quickly at 2A. Obviously, our primary message here is there is an easy way to say this. We're all very, very complicated, aren't we? We have lots and lots of elements, ontologically speaking, within us. We're made up of a lot of different kinds of elements. Some light, some dark, some positive, some negative, some wolf, and some mockingbird, right? At 2B, the use of the ellipsis is and the hyphens will take us back to our two great poets, Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, no question. You can see, obviously, the relationships there. At level 3A, I mentioned the Achillean and the Odyssean type, and certainly we can play with that. It is interesting to read the Iliad and Virgil's Aeneid, and to see that in fact you have at moments that characters will behave more wolf or fox-like, and then other times more mockingbird-like, we might say, more eagle-like. All of those animals at one time or another end up in classic works of literature as symbols, we might say. Finally, at 3B, I mean, this is a fun poem to ask about you personally. Like, when you look at the animal kingdom, at the zoo, what animals for you are probably the most that you identify with, and why? Sandburg, of course, making us think. Thank you.